Welcome back to our Obscure and Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg series. We are now descending into the second tier, where things start to get weird. If you're new to the series, a link to the Iceberg playlist will be in the description, so that you can catch up. I would also like to thank our channel members for the extra support, but you can also help out the channel by simply subscribing and turning on post notifications. Now that that's out the way, let's dive in. Our first entry starts with the mysterious case of Kathy Hobbs. Kathy had grown up in the 80s, and after Vivian, her mother, and her father divorced, Kathy and her mom moved to Vegas. Throughout her childhood, Kathy would always talk about how she believed she would die by age 16. She would constantly tell her mother that she did not want to grow up, and that she was afraid of turning 16. Growing up, she had also lost a close friend due to a heart condition. This, and the divorce of her parents, really began to take a toll on her. She would spend most of her time inside of her bedroom, and as her 16th birthday began to come around the corner, she would get more sad, and more afraid of dying. Finally, her 16th birthday came, and Kathy was fine. She felt relieved, and all of a sudden the fear of death began to recede, until July 23rd, in 1987, a little over 3 months after her birthday, when Kathy went up to her mother and told her that she wanted to go to the store. After, she was going to hang out with some of her friends. She informed her mother that she may be late and to not wait up for her. See, Kathy would often hang out with the children who lived in the apartment complex by the pool, so this was nothing out of the ordinary, and her mom let her go, then went to bed. This was around 11 p.m. And at 3 a.m., Vivian reported that she woke up to an intense headache. She stated that it felt like something hit her in the head. But after a while, the pain subsided, and she felt relieved, thinking, "It's over," eventually drifting back to sleep. When Vivian woke up, she went to check on Kathy, but when she got to her room, there was no sign of her. She searched the whole house, but nothing. Vivian quickly contacted the police, and soon, a search began. While all of this was happening, Vivian began to remember all of the times that Kathy told her she was not going to live past 16. She began to grow scared that maybe her daughter had been abducted, and maybe all of Kathy's premonitions were real. Sadly, 9 days later, while a hiker was out searching for crystals in the Lake Mead area, he stumbled upon the body of a young girl, and that girl turned out to be Catherine. Her premonitions turned out to be true. There was an investigation in the area where tire marks were found that pulled into the spot where Catherine's body was found, turned around, and left. There was blood on some rocks, and the cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. Kathy's family later discovered a collection of letters that she had written out to each of them in the event of her death. These letters had been written only 1 month before she turned 16, and the one to her mother read like this: "Dear Mother, in the event of my death, you shall get this letter. I hope you live happily, and I don't want you or anyone else to dwell on my death. I love you all very dearly. You were good to me, and nobody else could have been a better mother. Keep me alive in your heart, and don't ever forget me. Love always, Kathy." Despite investigation efforts, finding the person who did this to Kathy proved to be difficult, but eventually, an unidentified person would call into the police department with information that they believed would help in solving Kathy's case. They stated that Catherine had been taken by a person outside of the store in front of the Desert Inn. They stated that they had seen it, but did not report it for months, until this call was made. They also claimed that Kathy was yelling out the name Robbie to the person who was abducting her. A license plate number was also given to the police, but when they ran it, nothing came back. It seemed like investigators were met with yet another dead end, and for a very long time, Catherine's case went unsolved, until it was determined that a key suspect from Catherine's case, a person by the name Michael Lee Lockhart, was the person that took Kathy's life. You see, Michael Lockhart was already a serial killer. He was arrested and convicted for the separate murder of a 14-year-old, named Jennifer Kohler in Florida, and on December 9th of 1997, he was executed by lethal injection in Texas. Somehow Catherine had predicted this, and every day she lived in fear. It wasn't until she finally began to feel relief that this tragedy happened. She did not deserve this, and neither did any of the other victims of Michael Lockhart. Apart from the constant premonitions of dying, another strange part of the story is the intense headache that woke up Catherine's mother in the middle of the night. Could this have been some form of motherly connection between the two? Maybe a cry for her mother in her final moments, somehow making it all the way to Vivian. Sadly, we may never know. In February of 2016, a person by the name Chelsea wrote about a bizarre experience they had on the Your Ghost Stories website. It has been some time since I submitted a story. Not much has really been happening lately up until this morning. I thought I would share this experience as, to be honest, I'm not sure what I encountered. I live in Australia, in Melbourne, on the beautiful Mornington Peninsula. It is summer here at the moment, so the days are mostly hot and bright. I was driving to work on Tuesday, the 8th of February around 8 a.m. I stopped at a local supermarket to grab something for lunch, so I took a different route that I would normally take. I left the shops and made my way through some back streets and was approaching a small Anglican church on my left-hand side. As I was getting closer, I saw a very tall black thing emerge from the church entrance and quickly dart across the grass on the church grounds, heading towards the road. My instinct was to slow down as I expected it to cross in front of my car. I watched it move very quickly, taking long, strange strides across the grass. It reached the end of the church grounds, about to step onto the road, and then just vanished into thin air. It was very tall and thin, with a small head, jet black with no features. It had no arms that I can recall. As I was driving away in shock, all I could think was, what the heck was that thing with the scissor legs? It then dawned on me that it had no knees and was moving very quickly with straight scissor-like legs, if that makes any sense. I kept looking in my rearview mirror as I was driving up the road, completely confused as to what this thing was and where did it go. A minute up the road, I began to feel very nauseated to the point I thought I would have to pull over and vomit. I have had a few experiences in my life that have made me feel very nervous and uneasy, but nothing has ever made me feel like I want to be physically sick before. Thankfully, the sick feeling passed as I got further away. I had been thinking about it all morning and have no idea what I encountered. Was it a ghost, but in a strange form? Or was it something else? Has anyone else ever encountered something with scissor-like things? Thank you for reading my story. I know it isn't anything too thrilling or exciting, but it has me rattled enough I want to share it with others. To me, it sounds like it could be a Wendigo, or maybe even a rake. But who knows? Maybe they hallucinated this, or maybe it's just a ghost story. There's a blog on strangecode.blogspot.com about a newspaper article depicting a very strange case of a dying man's spell. The blog states this news article is from the St. Joseph's Herald Press and was from February 20th of 1936. I could not find the actual article, but the OP provided an image of what appeared to be the article's title, as well as the article quoted in their blog post. It goes like this. Harvey Davenport, who was informed by dying Jeffery Drossier, 38, that he would be unable to remove a mirror from the table after Drossier had looked into it and saw he was breathing his last, was so frightened by what he believed to be the spell of a dead man that he left the hospital where he was under treatment as Drossier's ward mate. He had given Rexton as his home, but at Rexton, it is understood that he has left for somewhere in the West. The mirror, apparently tossed at random onto the steel table, froze solidly to the table, and the efforts of Davenport, of hospital attendants, and of Dr. F.J. Maloney to remove it were in vain for more than 24 hours. Then Miss Adeline Kampf, a nurse from the operating room, using an ice pick with force pried it up. Today, fearful of violating ethics of their profession, and in the absence of Superintendent Emma Dixon from the city, nurses declined to discuss the case further or to present the mirror for public inspection. Dr. Maloney, Drossier's physician said he had no explanation for the sticking of the mirror to the painted steel table. He said he was positive that no adhesive or saliva had been used by the dying man. Asked if he believed the answer was a supernatural one, he answered, "Do I look superstitious?" Louis Deschanel, elderly Brimley citizen, an eyewitness to the death of Drossier, solemnly related the details of the death. "There were 4 of us in the ward with Mr. Drossier, and we could all see and hear everything that was said and done. I heard Drossier ask Davenport, who I think was of Indian blood, to bring him his hand mirror. The mirror was just a piece of looking glass without a back. Davenport took him the mirror, and we all heard the sick man exclaim that his face looked terrible, and his eyes wild. I was alarmed when he cried, 'My God, I'm dying.' I saw him toss the glass onto the table, where it lay near the edge. I watched the Davenport go toward the door as though to call a nurse, but he stopped when Mr. Drossier asked him to come back and give him the mirror again. As Davenport reached for the mirror, which was at the edge of the table, Drossier told him in a voice that was not loud, but which we could all hear, 'You won't be able to pick it from the table.' Davenport seemed frozen to the spot for an instant. Then the sick man started coughing, and we could see he was dying. A nurse came, but he died right away. Then Davenport and the others tried to take the looking glass from the table. It wouldn't move, and that's all I know. I'm sure I can't say what supernatural power or other cause is responsible, but that's the way it happened." Einar V. Jorgensen, bookkeeper, who personally tried every ordinary hand method of taking the mirror off, declared he had no doubt that the explanation was a natural one, but he could not say after inspecting the mirror what it was. "Perhaps perspiration from the silver on the mirror may be the answer," he hazarded. Detroit, February 20th. Scientists here and in Ann Arbor believed advanced molecular action, chemical reaction, and hypnosis today as possible explanations for the adhesion of a mirror to a metal tabletop, on which it was tossed by a dying patient. Professor George W. Carter of Wayne University said it was possible that the mirror and the table surface were so perfectly smooth that all the air was expelled. That, he said, might permit the molecules of the tabletop to exert an attractive force on the molecules of the mirror's surface, strong enough to hold them together against ordinary prying. Professor Peter Harbeck of the University of Detroit said that perspiration from the patient's hand may have set up a chemical reaction in the quicksilver of the mirror, causing it to adhere to the tabletop. Dr. Albert M. Beret, director of the State Psychopathic Hospital at Ann Arbor, suggested hypnosis. The dying patient, he said, might have convinced his fellow patient through hypnotic suggestion that he could not lift the mirror. This hypnosis, he explained, could have been transferred to other persons by recital of the dying man's statement. That's all we have of the article, but to me, the hypnosis theory seems somewhat plausible. I don't know if I believe this story, because in my mind, if the mirror was just a piece of looking glass, I feel as though it would have broken as soon as people started to really pry it, but that's not what they say in the story. So, we have no real answer, leaving what happened to that mirror to make it stick onto that table a mystery. In the Sicilian catacombs lies the mummy of a young girl named Rosalia Lombardo, who unfortunately passed away in 1920, right before her second birthday. Her father, heartbroken by the loss of his daughter, found one of the best embalmers in Italy, a man named Alfredo Salafaria. Rosalia's father wanted Alfredo to preserve his daughter and essentially make her live on forever, frozen as her young self. Alfredo took on the task and did such a good job that to this day, Rosalia is known as one of the best preserved mummies in the entire world. But Alfredo did not reveal how exactly he managed to preserve her so well. It wasn't until he passed away that his family found some of his writing that documented how he managed to accomplish this. Something else that set Rosalia apart is that people visiting the catacombs believed to witness her eyes blinking. When you look at her, she looks as if she is just peacefully sleeping. You might even believe that she is still alive. And throughout the day, Visitors of the catacombs would see her eyes open and close. Her mummy rests inside of a glass case, and the legend of the blinking mummy went on for over a century. Until one day, when the museum was doing a deep cleaning and moved Rosalia's case. This was when a man named Dario Mascali discovered that her eyes were only slightly opened, and it was the light changes throughout the day that gave the illusion of them opening and closing. But regardless of the legends, Rosalia's mummy is still fascinating and has even been labeled as the Sleeping Beauty of Palermo, forever asleep, frozen in time. In May of 2017, an incident occurred at the Putney Bridge in London, in which a jogger was caught on camera pushing a woman onto the road, where she nearly lost her life, if not for the quick thinking of the bus driver, who swerved to avoid her. This was all captured on CCTV, and at one point, the jogger loops back around and runs right past the woman he had almost killed, ignoring her as he continued casually jogging. Police investigated this incident and managed to arrest a 41-year-old man, but he was later released after they discovered they had the wrong person.
This shocking incident of a jogger pushing a woman, which almost turned tragic. His name is Eric Belquist, and he's a wealthy American investment banker. Only problem is, the accused Putney Bridge pusher claims he can't be that man in the video because he wasn't even in London when it happened.
Despite search efforts, police were never able to discover the identity of this individual, but the footage has become notorious online. Something about the way he just continues moving on, as if nothing is happening, is very scary. We still don't know for sure if this was an intentional act or not, but looking at the footage, it's pretty hard to say that this wasn't done on purpose, at least in my opinion. Back in the late 90s, construction of a townhome development in Crofton, Maryland quickly came to a halt when one of the bulldozers being used on the construction site unexpectedly collapsed, sinking into the ground. When the workers attempted to remove the bulldozer from the hole, they discovered a series of narrow tunnels that spread far off into the earth. These tunnels were just big enough for a person to crawl through, and word spread of this quickly amongst the workers and their families, leaving a man by the name Lawrence Lang and another man by the name Eric Denard intrigued. The two men sought out to explore these tunnels and found that they were very intricate and went far deeper than they were comfortable exploring. Scientists stated that these tunnels were not made from water erosion, and instead, the theory that these tunnels were made by some form of subterranean animal began to grow. This was because some claw and teeth markings could be found on some of the walls. This is the news article from the time that talks about these tunnels. Paleo Crofton is just a dig, by John Sherwood. Man's indomitable quest for its own past has stopped short in an Anne Arundel field with a future. For the last week or so, there has been an effort to stall the bulldozers that are determined to convert the raw field into a townhouse parking lot. The young couple who have roped off a small area of strange tunnels believe they have an extraordinary prehistoric find in the Crofton desert, but the builders want to get on with the job. It all began the other week when a dozer suddenly dropped about 15 feet through the sandy earth and uncovered an eerie series of underground tunnels and small caverns. Amateur diggers swarmed at the prehistoric site, determined to protect it until someone from the Smithsonian came to look it over. They poked and probed and speculated. Some even crawled into the 20-inch wide tunnels and explored as far as humanly possible. Some of the tunnels end abruptly, others branch off. There was a talk that maybe this was a clay mine of prehistoric man, millions of years ago, but there is nothing left to show that man was ever here then. Still, it was a fascinating thought. People raked the pit area and stared down into the tunnels, thinking long thoughts. But a local farmer and amateur archaeologist, William Dupkins, scraped and scratched with a trowel, speculating it looked more like a habitat of some kind of prehistoric rodent. He pointed out what appeared to be buck teeth and claw marks on the side of one cave. One thing for sure, said Eric Denard, an artist, the knowledgeable people who have looked at this say they have never seen anything quite like it. I'm making plaster casts of the scratchings on one wall. Prehistoric clay miners Very small in stature, large prehistoric rodents with huge bug teeth, buried treasure. What of this Crofton field on Route 3 not far from Bel Air? Enter Dream Shatterer, Dr. Nicholas Holton, Smithsonian Curator of Vertebrate Paleontology, who says the tunnels are natural in origin. Natural? But, from what I have heard from archaeologists who have looked at the tunnels, they appear to have been caused by underground water seeping through the sand and clay mixture to form these tunnels, he said. Also, he added, they are extremely dangerous and should be closed off before they collapse and someone gets hurt. I heard they had to drag someone out of those tunnels when he got stuck. Scratch one prehistoric Crofton man, likewise rodent. Enter parking lot. Despite it being blurry, you can see the image of a man who appears to be in one of these tunnels, and unfortunately, the development company did end up closing the tunnels off and continued building the townhomes. From what I could find, there was never a true investigation into these tunnels, so as to what they really were, we'll probably never know, leaving what made these tunnels a mystery. Peter Gibbs was a fighter pilot for the United Kingdom's Royal Air Force from 1944 to 1945, later going on to become a professional musician, playing with the Philharmonia Orchestra and the London Symphony Orchestra. Despite no longer being in the forces, Peter still loved to fly. He would often fly recreationally and had over 2,000 hours on his private pilot license, until one day, at age 55, when Peter took off into the cold night sky and vanished. His story became known as the Great Mull Air Mystery and is one of the biggest mysteries in aviation history. It was Christmas Eve, 1975. Peter and his partner at the time, Felicity Granger, had just taken a trip to the Isle of Mull in Scotland. As they were looking to purchase a hotel property in the area, the hotel they were staying at was the Glen Forsa Hotel, which was popular because it had its own airstrip that was used by private pilots, as well as emergency air ambulance services for the surrounding islands. When they got to the hotel, Peter rented a red and white Cessna plane with the registration mark G-AVTN and used it to fly around the islands with Felicity during the day. Once they got back to the hotel, the couple had dinner in the evening, where they drank wine as well as whiskey, before Peter suddenly got the urge to take a solo flight. At this point, it was a new moon, so it was extra dark, it was snowing heavily, and the hotel staff even attempted to tell Peter that flying was not a good idea. But Peter stood his ground. Nothing was going to stop him on that night, and he told them that he was going to fly anyways. Determined, and with only a single flashlight, Peter and Felicity then prepared the runway alone. Peter got in the aircraft, and it was stated that he let the engine run for longer than usual while he sat in it. He also repeatedly turned the lights on and off, before finally taking off into the dark sky. Peter was an experienced pilot, but after some time, and with the conditions getting worse, Felicity and the hotel staff began to get worried and called for an emergency search. But despite extensive ground, water, and air searches, no traces of the plane or Peter were found. It was like this for quite a while. To be more specific, 4 months. In April of 1976, when a shepherd named Donald McKinnon stumbled upon a fallen tree 1 mile away from the hotel Peter had taken off from, and on that tree was Peter's body. There was no signs of being in a plane crash, and oddly enough, it didn't seem like any animals had hurt him, but there was no mistaking it. This was Peter, and he was deceased. Coroners concluded that he had been dead for the whole 4 months he had been missing, and died due to exposure from the weather. But there was still no sign of the plane. He had to have jumped out somehow. But then where was the parachute? It was possible that he could have jumped out into the water, but a test to find marine organisms inside of his body came back negative, which would have meant that he had never gone into the water at all. And if he had been dead for the whole 4 months, then why hadn't anyone seen him? It was only 1 mile away from the hotel, but somehow everyone had looked over this spot. Peter's case just kept getting weirder and weirder. But again, we would hit another dead end, except this one would last a lot longer. It was 11 whole years without any clues, when divers stumbled upon a sunken Cessna plane about 300 meters from the Isle of Mull's coast. The plane was red and white, and according to the divers, it had the registration number G-AVTN, the same registration number Peter's plane had. I wasn't able to find evidence that this was the actual registration number that the divers found, but it was reported about it in this article, so I figured I would note that. What was weird about the plane was that both of the doors were locked from the inside, so there was no way anybody could have gotten in or out, except for through the small windshield in the front. But this went against the test that the coroners had taken, because there was no marine organisms in Peter's body. This would mean that he would have had to jump out of the windshield of the plane above the water and parachuted onto land. But where was the parachute? And if we look at an image of the plane that Peter was flying, we can see that the propeller is directly in front of the windshield, and with those conditions, jumping out through the windshield would have been extremely dangerous to pull off without getting seriously injured. Unfortunately, to this day, we still don't know what exactly happened to Peter on that night. There are a couple theories, one being that he had planned this to be his last flight, and that Felicity knew this was the last one. This theory comes from the fact that he sat in the plane for a lot longer than usual, and that he insisted to fly, despite the dangerous conditions. Then of course the theory that he thought he could handle the conditions, but when they got too bad, he had to bail out over the water and parachuted onto land. Except that despite this theory being the most reasonable one, the evidence just doesn't line up. Only Peter will ever know what actually happened that night, and unfortunately, he is no longer with us, solidifying the Great Mull Air Mystery as one of aviation's most notorious unsolved cases. Before we get into this next section, I do want to give a bit of a content warning. The image I am about to show you is disturbing, but with a bit of explanation, I think you'll understand that it's not so bad after all. The Cooper family photo is an image that has circulated the internet as one of the scariest paranormal photos ever captured. The story behind it is that sometime in the mid-1950s, the Cooper family of Texas bought an old farmhouse and moved into it. On their first night there, the father took a photo of the mom and grandma posing with the two kids at the dining room table. Everybody was happy and smiling. They were living the American dream. But when the photo was subsequently developed, they saw to their horror what looked like a body falling or hanging from the ceiling had materialized behind them. It hadn't been there when the father took the photo. The image is creepy, and since its creation has sprung many theories about the home being haunted, but rather than some paranormal event, it is more likely that this photo is a horror project. Mick West on the metabunk.org website would debunk the photo in good detail. He points out an account on the Something Awful site of a person who states they like to make creepy images as a hobby. Mick also states that a person by the name Robert Copper would come out to state that he and his brother are the subjects of the Cooper photo, and that it was entirely fictional, clarifying that their name is Copper and not Cooper. Robert provided a photo as well, and Mick would compare it to the alleged ghost photo. In it, you can see the strong similarities to the kids. It compares some of the objects in the photos as well, showing that the Cooper family ghost photo, like many other legendary paranormal photos, was more than likely a hoax. A blog post on the Haunted Ohio website archives a letter that was sent to the Colorado Springs Gazette news publisher. In it, the author describes an experience they had that they just could not explain. To the editor of the Gazette, ever since I read your request asking for personal experiences of seemingly inexplicable phenomenon, I have been debating my own mind whether you would consider an experience of mine worthy of attention. I have never told it to very many people, for it is not agreeable to meet that look of contemptuous incredulity, which is assumed by many superior people as a cloak for their ignorance of such matters. But it is something I have never been able to explain, nor has anyone ever been able to help me in arriving at any explanation. and I have always wanted to know what it was that produced the peculiar effect or influence that I experienced. So, I have decided to write it out and send it to you. If you think it is worthwhile, you may publish it, but for reasons which are perfectly obvious, I do not wish my name used in connection with it. If in your judgment the incident is too slight to be worthy of space, I should be glad to have my letter returned, for I want to submit it to someone who has had experience in these matters. The experience which I speak happened several years ago, but not so long ago. The memory of it is fresh in my mind. To all essential facts, I would make an oath before a notary. I was attending an Eastern university at the time and was 25 years of age, old enough not to be too readily deceived by imagination. I was absolutely free from any tendency to nervousness in any form, and was in general as free from fear as any young man of that age, of good health, and of clear conscience. But it is not alone on my own accuracy of observation and freedom from nerves that I rely, and therein lies the chief importance of the experience, for it was shared by the gamest, sanest, most dauntless young woman I ever knew. Fond of all forms of outdoor exercise, a 10-mile walk was no more to her than it was to me. On one such walk, I saw a huge black snake coiled in the middle of our path, and threw out my arm in front of my companion as the only way of bringing her to an immediate stop. "What did you do that for?" she demanded, somewhat indignantly. "Don't you see?" I said. "There's a big snake, and a minute more and you would have stepped on him." "What if I had?" was the reply. "I probably would not have hurt him." I was just giving this incident to show that she was not excitable. I told her a ghost story on one evening that had been told to me at first hand by a reliable person, and was ridiculed for attaching any belief to it. When I persisted in saying that I thought it might be true, she was a little contemptuous and considerably puzzled. I never ventured again to make reference to anything of the sort. Indeed, at that time, I gave very little attention to anything of the kind myself. One evening we took a walk on a quiet road near the outskirts of the city. We stopped for a moment, on a bridge crossing a shallow stream. It was a cloudy night, but moonlight penetrated the clouds so it was not dark. We sat on one railing of the bridge, facing the center, and could distinctly see across the bridge to the other railing. There had been nothing in the conversation to excite the imagination or nervousness in any form. It may seem foolish to tell you what happened, for it was such a little thing. But just remember that we were both well out of our teens, and neither of us morbid or imaginative. What was it? As we sat there, we heard a sound coming down the road, approaching the bridge. It was not a team of any kind, but sounded more like a good-sized dog trotting along. Then, the noise sounded on the bridge, nearing us, passing in front of us, receding in the opposite direction from which it came, and ceasing after it left the bridge. "What was that?" was the startled whisper of my companion. "I don't know," I answered. "Did you see anything?" "No. Did you?" Neither of us had seen anything, although both of us heard the sound pass in front of us on the bridge, every part of which was distinctly visible. We looked at each other in utter bewilderment. The noise had been light yet sharp, in the cadence of a galloping horse, yet not the heavy tread of a horse. In volume, the sound might have been made by a medium-sized dog, but the sound was not such as would have been made by a soft-footed animal, but sharp and distinct, as sharp as the sound made by a drumming on wood with fingernails. Yet the floor of the bridge was covered with a considerable coating of light dust. In my mind, mystification changed to an undefinable uneasiness. In a moment, as if by common impulse, we crossed the bridge to the opposite railing and stood looking down the stream. If anything came back across the bridge behind us, it was silent. But this time I felt thoroughly unstrung and anxious to get away from the spot where I felt, or imagined I felt, a baleful influence. Strange to say, this evil influence seemed to be directed towards me, like a shaft from a searchlight, from a spot on the left bank of the stream, a short distance below the bridge. I had an awful feeling of horror, sickness, impending death. I don't know what. Only a desire to get away from the bridge. But pride made me clench my fist and set my teeth, resolved that I would not speak, for I knew my voice would betray the fear I felt. Suddenly, just as I felt that I couldn't stand any longer, my companion exclaimed in a hoarse, unnatural whisper, "Come on, Let's go." We hurried home, almost in silence, except for my remark, "You seemed almost as glad to get away from that bridge as I was." And the reply, "I don't think I could have stayed there another minute without screaming." The next day, before I had described my own sensations at all, I asked my companion of the evening before, "You say you were anxious to get away from that bridge. Did the influence which caused the feeling seem to be merely general, or did it seem to proceed from any particular direction?" "That was the most peculiar part of it," was the reply. "It seemed to come from a point on the left of the stream, a little below the bridge." That is all of my story. I searched along the bank of the stream, trying to find some trace of camping party, or traps, or any sign of disturbance of the bushes. Not a thing I could find. I know it's not much of a story, but every word of it is true. Now what was it? Yours truly, Colorado Springs Gazette, September 18th, 1904. To me, this story sounds like it belongs on r/no sleep, but if it was a true experience, I do wonder what it was that was near that person. Could it have just been some sort of animal? Or maybe something else? That's all for this video. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2. And as always, thanks for watching.